The air in the stone room smells of stale rushes and freezing river damp. A teenage queen sits wrapped in velvet that cost more than a merchant's lifetime wages, shivering violently as the winter wind bites through the unglazed windows of the Tower of London, young and damned and fair. We can feel the freezing iron of the locks and hear the abrasive scrape of heavy timber sealing her away from the sunlight. Dynasties demand absolute control to survive the centuries. Across the sprawling Tudor state, Henry VIII's immense bureaucratic machinery is already shifting its massive weight to erase her from history, meticulously cataloging every jewel and estate she once owned, letters and papers. When absolute power dictates truth, what defense does an isolated human voice have against the crushing weight of a kingdom's official narrative? Down a darkened corridor, a nobleman clutches a scrap of paper, the expensive black ink smudged by shaking hands. The royal inquiries have cornered him, extracting terrified confessions that will force an irreversible path for them all. Letters and papers. The cold sweat of relentless anticipation drips onto coarse, unbleached linen that chafes the skin as Thomas Culpeper paces a suffocating stone cell. We can imagine the overwhelming stench of the Thames at low tide mingling with the damp chill of a space devoid of natural light. Century after century, monarchies have constructed imposing fortresses not merely to repel foreign invaders, but to systematically break the minds of their own subjects. The sprawling Tudor legal framework was expertly engineered to crush defiance through total isolation, transforming massive masonry and heavy iron chains into psychological weapons, letters and papers. This massive official compilation is highly accurate with dates and inquiries, but entirely reflects the state's official narrative and court bias against the accused. In a separate, deeply submerged chamber, Francis Derham faces the physical limits of the state's wrath, subjected to brutal coercion to extract the names of accomplices, letters and papers. We can almost feel the abrasive drag of heavy, iron-wrought restraints and the absolute darkness that accompanied his extreme treatment. Modern historical consensus suggests the severe physical toll applied to Derham was specifically calibrated to terrify the others into compliance without the council ever needing to lay a finger on the highborn queen or her favored courtier. Entire civilizations operate on the dangerous premise that ultimate truth can be excavated through physical suffering. Yet here lies the most devastating secret of the Tudor machinery. The official record shows the state never definitively proved a physical consummation between the Queen and Culpeper, only securing confessions of illicit meetings and affectionate words, extracted under the immense pressure of their impending doom. Young and damned and fair. Gareth Russell's respected modern analysis attempts to restore Catherine's agency, though it inherently relies on interpreting these fragmented, violently coerced testimonies. What happens to the fundamental concept of human justice when a regime decides that the mere shadow of betrayal carries the exact same penalty as the physical act itself? Empires hinge entirely on the fragile psychology of a single, unchallengeable sovereign. Observing the fallout from afar, the imperial ambassador reported a scene of theatrical chaos, writing that King Henry demanded a heavy sword to strike down the young queen personally before collapsing into sudden, violent weeping. Dispatches of Eustace Chapuis. Chapuis's letters provide rich, immediate observations of court reactions, but they remain heavily biased against the Tudor regime and highly prone to amplifying dramatic palace gossip. The archives are silent on the king's true internal state once the doors closed, but we can picture the suffocating, paranoid silence in his gold-leafed private chambers, the heavy velvet drapes muffling the panicked footsteps of courtiers, terrified of his volatile grief. Back in the freezing, isolated confinement of her royal prison, Catherine Howard is spared the brutal physical mechanisms used on Derham, letters and papers. She is instead abandoned to the agonizing friction of her own mind, listening to the metallic scrape of the guards' halberds echoing off the cobblestones, marking the hours until a violent end is finalized. Evidence points to this psychological vacuum, the sheer, unadulterated terror of waiting for the royal council's fatal decree, precipitating her complete mental collapse. When a human mind is trapped in a lightless cage, waiting for an irreversible path to be carved by men miles away, does the ultimate punishment truly begin on the block, or does it start the exact moment the heavy iron key turns in the lock? The scratch of a stiff quill on cheap parchment echoes off the weeping limestone walls. We can imagine the distinct metallic scent of the freezing River Thames seeping through the narrow iron grate, mixing with the sharp odor of unwashed linen and absolute, paralyzing dread. Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, is meticulously documenting a terrified young woman's fractured sentences during an intense interrogation, letters and papers. 2 lives collapsing. For centuries, the absolute authority of the English crown rested on the total control of royal succession, a vast, grinding apparatus of state power designed to crush any threat to the monarch's legacy. Yet in this damp room in the winter of 1541, the focus of that immense geopolitical machinery is reduced to the trembling hands of 19-year-old Catherine Howard, recently stripped of her jewels, her title, and her royal attendants, letters and papers. Modern analysis by historian Gareth Russell in Young and Damned and Fair attempts to restore Catherine's agency in these final weeks. He interprets her fragmented confessions not as the babbling of a guilty traitor, but as the desperate, calculated maneuvers of a cornered teenager trying to navigate an impossible labyrinth of interrogations. She was trying to survive. But the state required a legally binding narrative. Why do we consistently demand perfect victims from history instead of recognizing the raw, messy instinct to simply stay alive when faced with absolute power? Miles away, beneath the heavy shadow of the fortress, Thomas Culpeper sits in an agonizing void of information. We can picture the suffocating weight of the darkness in his cell, the silence broken only by the distant rhythmic pacing of guards in heavy leather boots. According to official state records, Culpeper was spared the brutal physical mechanisms of extreme treatment applied to others of lower birth. Letters and papers. Evidence points to him breaking instead under the sheer crushing anticipation of his inevitable fate. The Crown's primary weapon against him was a single fragile piece of material culture, a letter written in Catherine's own hand, signed, "Yours as long as life endures." This affectionate correspondence proves beyond doubt that illicit meetings occurred in the dead of night, letters and papers. However, Russell notes a critical historical divergence. While the Tudor court weaponized these letters to secure a conviction, the exact physical reality of their romance remains blurred. The explicit details of their encounters were extracted under immense coercion, leaving historians fiercely divided on whether the physical affair was fully consummated or merely a reckless, courtly flirtation. Young and Damned and Fair. The official Tudor state narrative, highly precise in its dates but deeply biased against the accused, presented the consummation as an undeniable, legal fact to justify the ultimate penalty, letters and papers. Total state control. Francis Derham was afforded no such ambiguity. Across the sprawling history of European empires, the state has always reserved its most severe physical corrections for those it deems socially inferior who dare to touch the royal sphere. In the deepest, coldest bowels of the complex, Derham faced the full, terrifying mechanics of brutal coercion, letters and papers. The surviving record does not tell us the exact temperature of the room or the specific volume of his cries, but we can imagine the terrifying clatter of iron ratchets. and the smell of old sweat permanently soaked into the wooden beams of the interrogation chamber. He was subjected to extreme treatment by the council to force a confession of a wider political plot against the king, letters and papers. Yet, in a staggering display of endurance, evidence points to Derham stubbornly refusing to admit to anything beyond his premarital relationship with Catherine, denying any treasonous acts committed after she had actually become queen. When we examine the machinery of power, we are often forced to sift through the heavily curated documents left behind by the victors. If you are finding value in stripping away the myths of history to see the human reality beneath, consider subscribing to the channel. Let us return to the dark corridors of 1541. It is right here, in the frantic shuffling of legal papers, that we find the most chilling reality of Catherine's final days. The official state documents reveal a detail easily overlooked. At the time of her arrest, the specific act of a sitting queen committing adultery was not actually defined by statute as high treason, letters and papers. Historians point out the terrifying implication of this legal void. The state did not merely execute the law to punish Catherine. The King's Council actively rewrote the fabric of English law. They drafted a bill of attainder specifically to condemn her without a formal trial, molding the rules retroactively to ensure she met a violent end. This unprecedented act made it high treason for an unchaste woman to marry the king, essentially criminalizing her past to secure her destruction, letters and papers. The law weaponized. The realization that absolute power does not just enforce the rules, but actively alters reality to justify its violence, forces us to ask, what is the true weight of justice when the judge, the jury, and the law itself are invented overnight, simply to ensure you do not survive? To the wider world, this legal maneuvering required a mountain of administrative labor. The official state apparatus generated hundreds of pages of inventories, seizing the personal properties, velvet gowns, and jeweled rings of those implicated, meticulously cataloging the financial windfall of the scandal, letters and papers. We can imagine the cold, calculating silence in the council chambers as clerks tallied up the seized assets of the condemned, the scratching of quills turning ruined human lives into neat columns of royal revenue. Russell points out that this bureaucratic efficiency highlights the mechanical nature of the Tudor regime.